Welcome to part 2 of my review of the latest edition of the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. This is the September and October 2020 volume. I will be reviewing 3 stories from this volume at this time. They're in my search for a new fantasy story that I really like. I have found that I've been reading the the stories that are not strictly fantasy, or at least in the traditional sense of the word fantasy. These 3 stories are all science fiction, or at the very least, like near future fiction. I would not consider any of them, the sort of Star Trek far off fantasy future. But these are all interesting little stories, and I'll share my thoughts on them now. For this segment of the review, I have selected the following 3 stories. If you wish to skip to the exact time of those reviews, the timestamps will be in the description of this video. The 3 stories are as follows: The Martian Water War, Notes Found in an Airlock by Peter Gleick, Little and Less by Ashley Blooms, and This World is Made for Monsters by Mary Rickert. The introduction notes that The Martian Water War, Notes Found in an Airlock, is Peter Gleick's first science fiction story. And this is actually very exciting. I really liked where this story sort of begins, and I think this idea would be really fascinating to me as like a novel that expands more upon the science, because Peter Gleick is a researcher in sort of in water, the conservation of water. And so this story is about about a hypothetical war surrounding the water on Mars, and Mars colonies harvesting the water. I thought this was an excellent little introduction to the concept of that subject. It sort of takes place in a near future where there are a series of colonies that are sort of that at one point were not competing for resources and were working together, but as water became more scarce, they had to pull in water from the atmosphere, and the water is stratified all over the planet. So it's not a matter of can they get to it, it's the resources that take to get it are sort of the issue. And there's a lot of interesting insight into the idea of water preservation as it relates to creating a Mars colony, and like this being a topic that I know like nothing about. I think this is really interesting and could really make an interesting novel, and I'd love to read more of this kind of thing. But anyway, this the title refers to Notes Found in an Airlock. The tragedy strikes the Yingguo base and Herschel station in the year 2115. It's sort of like an attack from one of the other Mars colonies, and I believe the Yingguo base is a reference to the Yingguo 1 Mars probe. So it's sort of, I think, implying that Yingguo base is sort of born out of that exploratory mission. But I'm not completely up to date on all my knowledge of that stuff either. But anyway, this story concerns a 17-year-old who essentially is the last person to put a stop to the impending collapse of this colony through all of her rigorous training and the expectations that she has living on this Mars colony, have been a child who was born on the Mars colony. And so all of these drills kick in, and she's preparing to essentially shut down all of the parts of the colony in order to preserve as much of it as possible, and dies in the process. And essentially it talks about how at the point where humanity should be working together to solve this problem of not enough water on Mars, there's escalating conflict, there's a diplomatic mission that goes poorly, and so it ends up with one colony trying to steal water from another colony, and tensions escalate until there is this conflict that causes the death of the protagonist in the story. And then there is a summary at the end of it that is like a hypothetical government report based on these notes, talking about sort of the easing of tensions after this catastrophe that killed a bunch of people, and how like it's, there's a hopeful resolution to the whole thing. So as far as a piece of fiction, I found it's not that fascinating in terms of its like actual narrative or anything. It's just interesting for the like the political and the environmental science stuff that's going on in it. So anyway, I thought that was a very interesting little short story, and I would definitely like to see more of those ideas like expanded out into something sizable, because this is a topic I don't know much about, and it feels like I don't know if it would be inappropriate to compare it to like Michael Crichton or something, or like H.G. Wells and like the people who wrote stories with a lot of scientific knowledge embedded in them. That was their sort of field of study. But I think that would be really cool. Anyway, so that was The Martian Water War. Ashley Bloom's Little and Less is more of I would say, a sort of an apocalyptic near future or fantasy that is also concerned with environmental issues. It takes place in sort of a world that is very rapidly becoming inhospitable to nature as a result of heating of the environment. And Ashley Bloom's manages to really craft this like kind of sickening and like eerily beautiful landscape through very evocative language. These descriptions of all the fungal growths on the trees and everything. And this story is far and away my favorite of the ones that I've read so far. I'll just spoil the whole review there and say that. So this story concerns a young woman whose family has died off as a result of this. Her parents, it says they commit suicide, and she doesn't really know how, but there seems to be a little bit more to it than that. And that essentially there's the environment is making it difficult to find food. The animals are dying off. They're slowly being replaced by other things. There's a bog that is taking over, essentially. And so this protagonist is locked away in her father's nuclear bunker that has sort of been cobbled together. It's not like a manufactured bunker. She points out that this is something that her father built because they couldn't afford to get a manufactured one, and so it's more. To me, that's more like the feeling that this thing is sort of grown out of a love for the environment around it. And this protagonist is sort of trying to preserve what she can, like cling on to whatever remains of this environment. And there are a ton of layers to this little story. There are like relationships between the protagonist and the environment, her descriptions of the environment, and how there's that kind of sickening feeling but very colorful detail of all of the things in the environment that parallels sort of the beauty of her actions of trying to save these creatures with the kind of grotesqueness of the actual acts of doing it. As well as sort of this character Laurel's just completely broken mental state that has good intentions that are marred by the horrors around her. So she talks about the fact that after her family died, essentially, she's left alone with the bodies, and she's so desperate to cling on to the remains of her family that she doesn't bury them until they have begun to decay. And once they have decayed, she's like picking out the bugs in the soil that she's buried them in and preserving them in jars, and like canopic jars in her home, in her bunker. And that very much relates to her actions throughout the story of trying to essentially just preserve these animals. And so she's captured a fox and some dogs and a fawn and some birds, and just sort of locked them away in her bunker, and is trying to feed them and restore them to health. But the story very grippingly starts with her trapping a fox in a bear trap that she has shaved down the edges so that it doesn't completely cripple the creature. But she's also being pursued by a larger creature. I forget exactly. I think she refers to it. She says that it was probably a cougar, and that. So she's using this dangerous method to try to extract these creatures and sort of preserve them artificially beyond the entropy of this environment, clinging on to the last hope that she can save it. But her methods are less than humane, I guess you could say. And this grows to a point where she finally discovers another human. She's been sort of mapping out the surroundings and learning the land as best she can, and exploring camps and scavenging and all of that, and finally finds a tent with a human being, a woman and her child. And rather than approach them and try to get help from them, her first instinct is to trap them like an animal, and then to approach them from a position of power, sort of showcasing the void in trust between her and anything else in this world. So anyway, it's a really fascinating story, and that's just the characters side of it. There's also all the stuff with the animals, the way she's trying to feed them with whatever she can scavenge, but they are completely uninterested in eating and just like staring blankly at the walls, like waiting for death. And then eventually, when she brings this fox back and is trying to restore it to health, but like the animals are so desperate for life and for something to reinvigorate them that the dogs go mad and eat the fox, and like the duck is auto cannibalizing. Like her efforts are falling apart before her eyes, and she's essentially just like her family had. So anyway, this is it's a really, really upsetting story, but it's really, really well done, and by far I think the most interesting one that I've read so far. So if you're going to read anything out of this book, check that one out. Really great, really great. I loved it. Okay, the last story that I read so far out of this is This World is Made for Monsters by Mary Rickert. This is a much more uplifting story than the other two. The other two are sort of tragedy disasters. Both excellently written, of course, but this is slightly more uplifting, sort of from the get-go. You know, it's the title makes you it had me thinking that this was going to be about the horrors of humans again, but in fact, this is quite the opposite. This is essentially sort of about one of the early quote-unquote alien sightings and sort of the UFO sightings and landings, like the Roswell incident, that caused sort of the birth of the green and gray aliens and all of that, and that iconography, and how that spawned an entire festival in this small town. And so this little short story is talking about is like from the perspective of someone who witnessed it and encountered and basically hung out with the aliens, and had dinner with them and played with them and stuff like that, from the perspective of someone who was a child at that location at that time. And so it's essentially going through how immediately, right off the bat, even in the rural countryside, like this bizarre alien spaceship lands, and immediately they're able to like establish contact and sort of have positive relations, and at some point that sort of twists and becomes they fear that maybe the aliens have abducted one of the children, but that and so they start throwing accusations. Someone comes out with a rifle and stuff like that, but it's quickly resolved that no, it was fine all along. But that one moment made the aliens leave and never come back, essentially. But that the town built this festival to sort of celebrate that incident, and it's sort of become a tradition, and everyone enjoys this big festival. And anyway, at the end of the story, the protagonist or narrator who has encountered this situation is talking about another one of the children who grew up with that in that environment, who is now sort of against this festival, saying that it's the festival is celebrating the idea of like a war against the aliens, like a war of the worlds kind of thing, and where the protagonist and the narrator is sort of saying, well, it sort of is and it sort of isn't. It's more just a festival celebrating and assuring that everyone has remembered them, that she hopes that the aliens will be pleased by the fact that nobody forgot them. And I thought that was kind of it's a little bit of a naive, but it's an uplifting little message, I think, to the end of the story. That it doesn't go into all of the ways that sort of festival could be actually an issue, but it's very innocent and childlike, like the narrator at the beginning of the story. So it's a little bit of a more uplifting end. Thank you for watching this video on the review of the second part of this magazine, the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, September and October 2020 edition. I will be releasing the third part of this very soon as I have finished a few more of these stories. If you have not seen part one, the link is in the description below. Of course, you can watch any of these out of order, as they are all about individual short stories, so there's no need to really go through them in any particular order, as I have not gone through them in any particular order in the book, other than that I have sort of gone through the shortest ones first, and I'm going through the longer ones later. But anyway, thank you for watching. Hope to see you in the next part. Thank you again for watching the video. I just thought I would add a little postscript onto the end of the video, sort of introducing myself, since this is the first video that is going to premiere on my YouTube channel. The first part being sort of released to my immediate friend group. I am a composer, actually, not a writer by trade or by reviewer by trade. I am interested in almost all art forms, at least to a moderate degree. From the standpoint of I dabble in a little bit of writing, I dabble in a little bit of art, but music is my main focus. I am particularly interested in the subject of escapism in art and media, and so I thought that I would take some time to, since we're all stuck in this lockdown right now, to seek out some new literature that maybe captures that feeling for me. It's been a while since I've really engaged with new literature. I find more and more often that my time is completely occupied by other things, and I just don't have the time to sit down and read a book. And now, of course, now that we're all stuck indoors, books have become the best way for me to disconnect from all of the screens that I have to stare at nonstop every day, and also to disconnect from my instruments. So I picked up this magazine of fantasy and science fiction about a week ago, and I have never read or seen this magazine before. So this is a completely new experience for me, and of course I will get a few details and facts wrong about it in the process of these reviews. So I apologize if you're a big fan of this magazine, as I'm completely new to it, and just sort of sharing my thoughts as I go along. I've had a great experience with it so far, and I hope you enjoy these reviews. And if you don't, and you disagree with me, then please let me know. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts, as I am not some sort of professional critic by any means, and I'm simply sharing the thoughts that I have as an amateur fan of this stuff, and also kind of coming from it from a composition angle, thinking about the way that I think about music and sort of the way I've been trained to think about music, and trying to break some of that training a little bit in the way that I think about these stories. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed, and I hope I will see you again in future videos. Thanks again for watching.